December 1985. A little irritated and late, Paul Castellano rushes in his car along the streets of Manhattan. Endless traffic jams, the pre-holiday rush of crowds of people in stores and on the street, are distracted by the upcoming Christmas holidays. Castellano is the most punctual in the Gambino family. For the first time in his life he is late for a meeting. Having parked near the Macy's store on 34th, having bought everything he needed, he asks his new deputy, part-time former bodyguard Tommy Bilotti, to take him to the Sparks restaurant located on East 46th. By the way, the meeting was not so serious even formally. He had to meet with Kappa Frank Lasico and the son of the man who had recently died of cancer, Anela Della Rocca, just to honor the family of the deceased. Rushing through Manhattan, he recalled everything that had happened during the year. He has been the head of the Gambino family for 9 years now, and prosecutor Rudolfo Giuliani, who is trying to put almost his entire family behind bars, has added a lot of fuel to the fire. Lost in his thoughts, he didn't even notice how Bilotti got stuck in another traffic jam on 3rd Avenue. The red lights of the cars and the burning shop windows plunged him into a special state. By pressing the pedal, Tony Bilotti was able to slip through the red light, and was already turning onto 46th towards the Sparks restaurant. Literally 5 meters from the main door, the black Lincoln Town car parked. Without waiting for Bilotti, Castellano pulled the handle and got out of the car. A moment later, shots rang out. 2 bullets reached their target. Castellano fell next to the open door of his car. A moment later, the next shots rang out, hitting Tony Bilotti directly. On this day, the era of Paul Costala's reign ended, marking the beginning of a new era for John Gotti, who ordered the murder of the father of the Gambino family, and became the last big don of the Italian mafia in New York. John Gotti, full name John Joseph Gotti Jr., was born in October 1940 in the South Bronx, USA into an Italian family. Being one of 13 children and one of 5 brothers, the boy lived in complete poverty. His family lived in a very small house. His father was an ordinary laborer for $1 a day, and his mother was a housewife. At the age of 12, the Gotti family moved to Brownsville, one of the Brooklyn neighborhoods. A completely turbulent place where dozens of street gangs systematically settle scores with each other. Of course, Gotti did not stand aside. Having dropped out of school at the age of 16, the guy became involved with a local teenage gang that worked closely with the mafia. Thanks to his brilliant mind, he quickly becomes its leader. There he makes his first close connections in the world of the mafia, meeting Angelo Ruggiero and Wilfred Johnson, better known as Billy Boy. Even before meeting the mafia, Gotti already had the entire area on a short leash, instilling fear just by his appearance. His obstinate and hot-tempered character often played a cruel joke on him. Once he borrowed a decent amount of money to some guy, who delayed the day of repayment for a long time. One day, John Gotti received information that that same guy was not going to return the loaned amount at all. They say Gotti is a fool and will forget everything tomorrow. But not. There it was. Enraged, he burst into the bar where the debtor often spent his free time, taking a bat with him. He beat the guy so bad he almost died. This is how Gotti first found himself in the police force. Everything turned out well. They didn't start the case, but only issued a fine, and a couple of hours later the obstinate boy John was already walking around free as if nothing had happened. Of course, he had no intention of engaging in petty robberies and racketeering. He dreamed of big things. Thanks to his connections with small mafiosi, he managed to reach one of the members of Cosa Nostra, agreeing with him about work. He gave the guys from the gang orders, and they, in turn, carried them out so that this would not happen. He collected tribute from suppliers, blackmailed and intimidated Cosa Nostra debtors. This is how John Gotti met Karaman Fatica, who was Gambin's boss in Brooklyn at the time. It is believed that it was Fatica who taught Gotti a lot about the life of the mafia, introducing him to the laws and rules of this world. Being under his wing, John Gotti brings mafiosi, his brother Gino and his friend Rui Iro, into the family. Together they carry out all of Fadic's small assignments, but are mainly involved in stealing cars and trucks. One day, on one of Fadic's assignments, Gotti even kills two guys with direct shots to the back of the head. Because of what happened on May 15, 1957, he again falls under arrest, and again due to the lack of significant evidence, he leaves the police station a couple of days later, unharmed. At the age of 21, he married a young girl, the daughter of an Italian builder and a Jewish woman from Russia, Victoria de Giorgi. A year later, a daughter, Angela, was born into the young family. A little later, a daughter, Victoria, and two sons, John Jr. and Frank. And Gotti, in order to avoid unnecessary rumors about his activities, officially got a job as a driver at Garns Express. With such an excellent cover, he continues to steal trucks with ease until he ends up with the police again in 1963. This time Gotti spends 11 days in the city jail, and thanks to his connections he is released again. On one of the most ordinary days, together with his brother John, Gotti steals a truck loaded with televisions worth a total of $20,000. A serious chase ensues, as a result of which Gotti and Jean surrender themselves and are sentenced by the court to 5 years in prison. And in 1969, John Gotti was released on bail. A future master of his craft, he returns to his field of work, and literally a couple of months later, while attempting an unsuccessful theft of 2 trucks on one of the New Jersey highways, he is caught again and sent to Lewisburg Prison in Pennsylvania for 4 years. A couple of days after arriving there, he introduces himself to Cormano Galanti, the don of the Banana family, convicted of selling heroin, and quickly finds a common language with him. From that moment on they become good friends. After the release of both, Galanta often invites John to his Lammer Club, trying to maintain close friendly ties with him. By the time of his next release, Gotti returned to Carmine Fatica, who at that time opened a store for hunters and fishermen called Birkin. Of course it was not just a store. This was the place where all of Fadic's subordinate friends gathered. From that moment on, the Gotti gang changed its name to the Birkin Gang, thereby matching the name of the store. In 1973, John Gotti received his first serious assignment. At the beginning of the year, one of Carlo Gambino's nephews was kidnapped in order to obtain a huge amount of money. Unexpectedly, Gambino receives the news that while the ransom was being demanded from him, his nephew Emmanuel was already dead. He summons John Gotti and personally gives him a task whose goal is to find the kidnapper and, of course, kill him. To help Paul Castellano, one of Gambin's main deputies gives his man Ralph Gallin. So on May 22, 1973, James McBurney, allegedly the organizer of the kidnapping and murder of Gambin's nephew, is found in one of the Gotti Ruger and Gallon eateries. The plan was that Ruggiero would lure McBurney out of the diner under the pretext of selling drugs, and then kill him. But the situation changes exactly at the moment when Gallion, who is in a state of severe drug intoxication, intervenes. Without any thoughts, he takes out a weapon and, in front of the visitors of the establishment, eliminates McBurney without explanation. Gotti was furious. For the first time in his life he was entrusted with such an important matter, and even who was the boss of one of the families. He could easily climb the official ladder, finally taking a real position, but because of some Galliani, he lost everything in an instant. He was so angry and out of his mind that that evening he killed his partner, taking revenge on him for such a gross mistake. But Gotti forgot about the most important thing. According to mafia laws, he cannot kill family members without the boss's permission, and anyone who breaks the laws faces death. A new problem loomed over John Gotti and there was no way out of this situation. Then, unexpectedly, Della Croce, another of Gambina's deputies, stands up for the young and ardent soldier Gotti. The thing is that from the very appearance of Gotti in the mafia clan, the guy immediately became Della Croce's favorite. He, in turn, actively helps the guy in his ascent to the so-called Olympus. A couple of days after the murder of Galeone, an emergency meeting was held that lasted all night, which was attended by family boss Carlo Gambino, his deputies Paul Costello and Agnello Della Croce, and his advisor Joseph Armona. It took Della Croce a lot of effort to save Gotti's life. The most important argument was a phrase that truly influenced everyone present at the meeting. According to our laws, Gotti must die, but thanks to such people, Cosa Nostra still exists and remains invincible. The boss gave Gotti a chance, but he had to confess to the murder and officially serve his time in prison. Della Croce, with his good connections and lawyers, John Gotti was given only 4 years for premeditated murder, reducing his sentence by almost 5 times. At that moment, while Gotti was serving his well-deserved sentence, the irreparable happened. Carlo Gambino died, and the place of the boss of his family passed into the hands of Polo Castellana. Agnello Della Croce was able to thank his mentor only in 1979, 2 years after leaving prison. At that moment he was accused of organizing illegal gambling. It seemed like the deadline was short, but the FBI began to work closely with the only witness, Anthony Plate, Della Croce's alleged accomplice. Plate began testifying against Agnello to the authorities, revealing important information to them. After another interrogation, Gotti followed Plate and shot him near the house. In 1980, events took place that left a deep mark on the life of John Gotti. His 12-year-old son Frank dies under the wheels of his neighbor John Favara. At the boy's funeral, the man tries to apologize to Gotti for what happened, but they generally receive a fair amount of whacking with a bat from John Gotti. After being discharged from the hospital, Favara begins to receive threatening letters. 4 months after the incident, he completely disappears. According to the witness, he was hit on the head, thrown into the trunk of a car and taken away in an unknown direction. John Favara was never heard from again. John Gotti took the death of his son very hard and even equipped one of the rooms in the house as a memorial in honor of his son's memory. Faced with one problem, others began to emerge. Having become the boss of the Gambin Costello family, he quickly acquired enemies. Even Gotti begins to hate him, because there should be a worthy person in his place. Della Croce should be the boss. John spoke out against Castellan's activities more than once, but restrained himself until the last moment. On December 4, 1985, Della Croce dies from a severe stage of cancer, and the last straw is that Castellana simply does not come to the funeral of his deputy and good friend. Thus, completely losing his already shaky authority in the eyes of his subordinates. Then, having gathered his Bergen gang of underbosses of the Bonanna and Column families, Gotti proposes to eliminate their unlucky boss. According to the plan invented by joint efforts, it was decided to schedule a meeting between Lichico and Castellan at the Sparks restaurant, located in one of the districts of Manhattan. On the appointed day, December 16, 1985, a large black Lincoln parked at the entrance to the restaurant. 3 men in black coats with a revolver in their hands were already waiting for Castellan on the street. Seeing Boss Gambin getting out of the car, shots were fired and all the people around ran away. Just 2 bullets and Castellan's life ended as fleetingly as it began. But it didn't end there. Seeing another person getting out of the car, several more shots were fired. This is how Castellano's bodyguard and deputy Tommy Bilotti was killed. At that moment, another black Lincoln drove next to the corpse, in which John Gotti himself was sitting, making sure that the job was done. The shooters were Edlina, Fat Sala Scala and Vinny, who was part of John Gotti's Bergen gang. So, with success and style, Gotti became the new boss of the Gambino family, one of the most influential families in New York. Since that ill-fated day, not a single family has ever tried to contradict John Gotti. During the entire period of management of the Gambino family, until 1992, they tried to kill John Gotti 3 times, but all 3 times without success. They couldn't even simply wound him, thereby removing him at least a little from their important affairs. he was arrested again and simply released as if nothing had happened. It seemed that the whole mountain was knee-deep to him. But the situation changed in 1992, as it turned out that his deputy, Salvatore Gravano, had been cooperating with the FBI for several years, leaking to them everything that was happening in the Gambino family. Gotti is once again arrested, and at one of the hearings the court pronounces a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of bail. He was convicted primarily of murder, because during the entire period of work in the mafia, you cannot count on two hands how many times he pulled the trigger of his revolver. Also, the judge did not forget about the constant racketeering on the part of John Gotti. Thus ended his reign. Until 2002, one of the most brutal gangsters of the New York Mafia, toured American prisons almost every year until he died in one of them from throat cancer. He passed away quickly, quietly, and unexpectedly. Almost the same as Agnello Della Croce. Even after his death, he still remained a darling of the public and the tabloid press. They often wrote about him, they often accused him, they were inspired by him. He was the only mafioso of his kind who more than once emerged from any legal proceedings unharmed. Having received the nickname Teflon Don during his lifetime, his memory was immortalized in cinema and music. In 1994, a drama directed by Roger Young called Catching Gotti was released on television, showing how John Gotti became a big shot in the New York Mafia. 2 years later, another Gotti TV movie was released, directed by Robert Harmon, which received 3 Golden Globe Awards, a Satellite Award and 2 Primetime Annie Awards. And the most unsuccessful film, telling the story of a mafioso, was released in 2018. The Gotti Code, an American drama by Kevin Connolly, starring John Travolta, was nominated for the Golden Raspberry Award in 6 different categories. In the music world, Gotti's name comes up very often. The American group Fan Lovin' Creamels dedicated one of their songs to him in 1996, with the telling title King of New York.